the last video, we took a look at how we can program some additional MIDI by using the samples that we created from the layers that we extracted, simply dragging them over into the expansion kit section over here. And then simply by following the MIDI information in terms of which one of these pads are mapped out to which note, we could go ahead and we could program additional MIDI information that would sequence and play along with our Regroover Pro project over here. So in this case, we have this 4-bar loop that we've been working with. One thing that we can also do, in addition to being able to simply extract these samples and adjust the envelope of these samples and the in point and the out point, is we have some basic effects that we can do. So we have the levels that we can adjust here on a fader. So we can move things up or down. Let me just go ahead. Let's just close this for a moment. And let's go ahead and let's just work with, for example, the kick in this particular section. So I'm just going to go ahead. Let's activate the kick. And let me just change my looping range over here to something like this. Maybe I'll just move this back a little bit, probably about to here. This might not make sense mathematically, but it will work in terms of demonstrating what we need to have a look at over here. So now if I was to go ahead and play this, we are going to hear the kick notes being triggered, but we're also going to hear the layers. So let me just come into our layers section over here and let's just power down these layers because we're going to be engaging playback from within our DAW, and this would be following because it's set to host right now. So let's go ahead here and let's just press play. Okay, so now we have these kick drum samples that are coming, but these are not being triggered by the layers section. These are being triggered by the editor section. So I've mapped out these two notes, which are C5, and they're triggering this sample that we extracted from the layers. Let's go ahead and let's hop into our effects tab. Just going to press stop here for a second. Let's quickly take a look at the different options that we have available. So first and foremost, we have our mix, we have our left and right panning perspective, and based on the stereo information that you have in your samples, we have our mid-side slider. So let's go ahead and let's have a look at these. So this is pretty simple. If I want to move this up, I can have something that's being triggered louder, or I could move this down. Now, depending on what you're doing with your samples and how you want to offset this, and again, I'm just shift clicking to return this back to its default unity gain position. We can have these come in a little bit lighter. So if you're programming some ghost notes to play over top of the layers, the pattern that's happening with the layers, you could go ahead and you could adjust the gain. Also, if you've lost any gain by making some adjustments, you could go ahead and bring that up if you needed to. Then, of course, we have our left and right panning perspective, which we can adjust. That's pretty self-explanatory. And like I mentioned, if we had any mid-side information, we could adjust that as well. So this is a pan or a balance perspective between the sides and the mid. So perhaps you'd want to make your kick right down the middle. In this case, I'm just going to leave it exactly where it is. Next up, we have this EQ section. Now, this is pretty self-explanatory. We have our frequencies that we can dial in over here, and then we have our gain amount over here. Now, both the high frequency and the low frequency, we have a shelf EQ. So essentially, we just want to set our frequency, and then the minute I make any adjustments, you can hear that sizzle starting to come in on the top end. Let's bring it down a little bit so we could have a little bit more crack coming out of this kick drum. Then we have our mid frequency over here. Now, as you'll notice, this is a different pattern. So where the top and the bottom is a shelf, this we have just a straight parametric band, which we can adjust as well with a fixed Q. So we can adjust this setting if I wanted to pull out any frequencies. So let's go ahead and let's just boost this. Let's say we wanted to pull down that frequency a little bit. And then, of course, we have our low frequency. And this, again, is a shelf. So I can get a lot of boom out of this if I wanted to. Now, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and turn the EQ off because I don't feel like it needs anything. Next up, we have our compressor. Now, it's important to note that these settings we have over here, they are discrete for each different pad that we adjust. So, for example, we're taking a look right now at the kick sample that's on C5. Now, if I wanted to adjust my snare sample that's on C#5, then I could go ahead and just by clicking this expansion pad, you'll see that we have a new effects section that's been brought up over here. Keep your eye on this. As I click the kick section, you'll see that it changes. So it's important to note that this effects section is for every single one of these pads. So essentially, we have 16 different EQs, compressors, gain sliders, and stereo or mid-side knobs over here to control those balances. Now, another thing worth mentioning, and we're going to take a look at this in another video as well in a little bit more detail, but if you wanted these samples to be coming out discrete outputs, then you could go ahead and you could adjust the output that we have available. So in this particular case, we have 16 different outs. So I could assign each of these discrete sounds to be coming out a separate output if I wanted to. Now, what I want to do in the next video is I want to start to take a look at some of the sync settings, and specifically using the host setting when synced to a DAW with a source session BPM. So we'll catch you in the next video.